Hi everyone, we are back for our weekly video talk from the Bible, and this week we're going to continue in the book of Acts, which is a book full of amazing things in which God acts through his disciples with amazing power. Now have a think. Have you been in a situation where you've had to be really brave? Maybe you've had to say something or do something that you know is right, but those listening to you or watching you don't like what you have to say. How do you feel in that situation? Scared? Perhaps you'd wish you'd never started this and would just rather run away. Well, we're going to hear about a man who showed incredible bravery in the most difficult of situations. His name was Stephen, and we learn about him in the book of Acts, chapter 6 and 7. Now the Bible tells us that he was a very kind man, very wise. He loved God very much, and the Spirit of Jesus was working in him, giving him power to perform amazing miracles among the people. Now just in the same way that Jesus' miracles pointed to the fact that he was the Son of God, this same power in Stephen, given to him by God, was also confirming who Jesus was and why he had to come to our fallen world to save sinners. Stephen was highly respected by other Christians, and he was especially chosen to be one of a group of 7 people to do some special tasks. One of them being to make sure that all of God's people had enough food, despite any difficult circumstances they found themselves in. This was a man who had genuine compassion for those in need and could be trusted to do all he could to make sure their needs were met. But there was a problem. There were some people who were not huge fans of Stephen. There were some religious leaders who were not living as the Bible said, who began to spread all sorts of false rumours about him. You see, when they began to argue with him over what he was saying, he seemed to have all the answers. And the deeper they got into their conversations, the more they felt unable to answer back. They were worried. They even accused Stephen of blasphemy, which means that Stephen was making fun of God and great men of God like Moses. Hey, I don't think so. That was clearly a blatant lie. But that was how far they were prepared to go to stop this man from telling the truth, which they didn't want to hear. So they tried to make the leaders and other people really hate Stephen. And eventually they got their way. Stephen was arrested and he was put on trial. How do you think Stephen felt at this point? Scared? Angry? Even upset? I mean, he had every right to feel these things because he'd done nothing wrong. I don't know about you, but I would most likely be scared of having to face all these angry people. But the Bible tells us in Acts chapter 6 verse 15 that as they intently looked at Stephen, they saw that his face was like the face of an angel, reflecting the presence of God with calmness and authority. During the trial, the high priest who was in charge asked Stephen if the accusations that had been brought forward were actually true. Now Stephen, he could have used his expertise to get himself out of trouble, but he did nothing of the sort. Instead, he took the opportunity to tell them about Jesus. And so Stephen began to reply with a huge speech that takes up most of the next chapter. That's all in chapter 7. He started it by telling them all about the story of God's people. He spoke about Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David and Solomon, how God had prepared the way for his son to come into the world to show everyone how they can get right with God once again. But how Jesus was rejected by the leaders who put him to death. You can imagine how this made the religious leaders feel, can't you? This made them furious, really angry. And to make matters even worse, as they began to show their anger, Stephen looked up to heaven and said, "Look, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." He saw Jesus in glory. Well, how do you think the leaders felt now? It was all too much for them. So they rushed towards Stephen, and they dragged him out of the city, and they picked up heavy stones and they threw them at him. But amazingly, as Stephen fell to his knees, he prayed. And these were his words: "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Do not hold this sin against them." Wow! What powerful words. In fact, they were words very similar to the Lord Jesus when he was dying on the cross. So Stephen, right up to the very end of his life, continued to share the love of God. But here's the amazing truth. This wasn't the end, because Stephen was now in heaven with Jesus. Now, even though his life was difficult, he knew he would be in heaven because of the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and because he had put all his trust in Jesus. Have you done that yet? If not, why not do it today, even now? You see, we don't always know how things are going to end. We don't know when it will be safe to go back to school, for instance, or see our friends again. But God knows what's going to happen, and he will give us the strength we need to cope with whatever situation we find ourselves in. So as we continue to pray to God, read the Bible and do what it says, we will grow more like Jesus every day, just like Stephen did. Well, thanks for watching. Enjoy the week ahead. See you soon.